Hello everyone, or good evening to all of you. I'm Sneha, your moderator for this session on Intertwined, the rights of humans and non-human animals. I'm delighted to introduce you to the brilliant Dr. Yamini Narayanan, a senior lecturer in international and community development at Deakin University, Australia. She's also the founding convener of the Deakin Critical Animal Studies Network. She has also served as the founding co-convener of the Animals and Sociology thematic group at the Australian Sociological Association and is a lifelong fellow of the Oxford Centre for Animal Ethics. Her research focuses on two major themes: the nexus between animals and the urban planning in India, and the intersections of speciesism, casteism, and racism in ways in which animals are enrolled in nation-building projects. This session will be an insightful one, and if you have any questions, please drop them in the chat box and we will address them post the session. A very warm welcome to Dr. Yamini. Over to you.
Thank you so much, Sneha. And please accept my warm thanks to all of you organizers of the India for Animals 2022 conference. It has been such an honor. It is such an honor to be here. And I'm actually really, truly awed by the sheer forces of nature who have been behind the organization of this event in virtual form. And I really want to acknowledge and highlight that this is no small achievement, doing it from India, which has been the epicenter of the global pandemic for a long time now. So I hope you and your families are well and safe. And my special thanks to Sanjana and Sneha Mahimane, who have been so graceful and patient and kind through the organizational logistics with me. And I also want to say, before starting this presentation, a special thanks to Shreya Paropkari, who accompanied me to a few battery farms outside of Hyderabad a few years ago. Bearing witness in these spaces, whether as an activist or as an academic, is difficult. And having a comrade in these spaces, either through conversations or in person, is an act of solidarity that I value immensely. So in this presentation, I want to talk about 3 or 4 specific individual chickens in particular, right? So these 3 or 4 specific hens out of the 65 billion chickens that are hatched every year globally. And I want to talk about why these specific hens are a really important insight into the global egg farming industry per se. And all of these hens were ex-battery hens, ex-commercial hens who were rescued, or could we actually say liberated from egg farms. And some of these chickens, like about a few of them so far, have found refuge in our backyards. So, and these are the chickens that I actually want to focus on, right? And you can see in the PowerPoint there, Ruby, she's one of our hens, and she's been liberated for a few years now. What happened was just about a week before this as I was preparing for this presentation, I received a condolence card for one of our chickens who was euthanized by our vet, right? And she was an ISA brown vet. You can see ISA browns in the battery farms below, in common battery farms. These are typical scenarios in virtually every country in the world. And we get a card from the veterinarian, a condolence card for a chicken who was basically formerly in a battery farm. And he says, "Oh, I'm so sorry to hear that she passed away, etc." But a condolence card for an ex-battery chicken is nothing short of political, given that they are bred, live really brutally short lives, and are slaughtered every year in the millions and billions. It raises a lot of questions. It raises a few questions, such as what does it mean to witness? And what does it mean to participate in the life and death of an intensively farmed animal in this manner? What does it mean to actually rear these rescued animals in your own backyard? What new knowledge comes to light? We already know about a whole range of chicken welfare issues. Undercover activism. In fact, the egg industry themselves will acknowledge a few issues with chicken welfare and chicken farming. But what new knowledge, what new insight comes to light when we think about chickens in a completely different space, such as in a rescue space as opposed to a farm, where they're no longer egg commodities, where they're just hens, where they're just birds, right? And why is this new knowledge important when we're talking about chicken-focused advocacy, or in fact farmed animal advocacy much more broadly as well? So the individualization of, like 2 or 3 chickens against 65 billion chickens hatched each year. Why is this important? So 65 billion chickens, this is as of 2020 figures, are globally hatched by the egg meat industry every year, right? Now, 65 billion is not a number that our minds can compute. We can't compute 65 billion. And as a result, chickens are a species so numerous that they're almost completely abstracted. Like it's really impossible to imagine a chicken in a non-abstracted way, because all we see are huge numbers, massive populations, and abstraction as a result. So coming to know 3, 4, 5, 6 chickens in a much more intimate way becomes really political, but becomes also really valuable in terms of the knowledge that they generate. Now, feminists for a long time have talked about this whole idea of global intimate, not necessarily in an animal context, but even in a human context, right? The idea of the global intimate is that the intimate, that is knowing individuals intimately or closely, can actually tell us a lot about the global landscape. It can actually tell us a lot about the global context in which these individuals are located, right? So as activists, all of you would know, many of you would know, that when you're witnessing individual animals, and they always leave a mind, leave an impression in our minds, right? We're going to farms, you go into, slaughterhouses, you go into these spaces and you witness individual animals, and they always tell you, and they definitely leave an emotional impact, as we all know. But witnessing individual animals also tells us something about the global animal agriculture sector itself. Like, we actually learn a lot about the kind of, even individual animals having a specific kind of suffering, is in a specific condition. It actually tells us something about the larger global animal agriculture sector. So global intimate is a really important way of trying to understand through individual suffering, through individual realities. What can we actually learn about the global, right? So this is certainly true of farms, but this also certainly becomes true of witnessing these farmed animals in a rescue space, whether it's a vegan rescue space, whether it's a larger sanctuary. But the focus here is on a vegan home, like an individual home, right? So which is not particularly unusual at all, because in the West there is this movement called the micro sanctuary movement. So we already know about sanctuaries and animal shelters, but there's also a micro sanctuary movement, which basically means your individual home can be a sanctuary, and a micro sanctuary basically can be as small as one human rescuer and one rescued animal. Right, so these micro sanctuaries, which commonly, of course, it's cats and dogs that are usually rescued. But when and when it comes to farmed animals, I guess the easiest animal to rescue and keep in your home is probably a chicken, because of their size. But this having these interactions with these animals in a rescue space again offers new insights, and this knowing. Is one of my arguments. This knowing about new insights that come to light, not necessarily in a farm, but in a rescue space, and knowing about these new forms of suffering and caring about this suffering is actually crucial for a full advocacy of animal justice, right? And on the right, you can see one of our rescued chickens. She was rescued from an actual slaughterhouse. So they were actually overnight in the slaughterhouse. Undercover activists went and grabbed as many as they could, and some of these chickens came to us. So she came to us in February of 2017. Lived for close to 3 years, almost 3 years, and as you can see, she was a properly battery chicken. Like she was debeaked so much. That it was actually we were actually quite surprised that she even managed to survive, because she found it so difficult to eat. But then, yeah, so it reveals a lot about animal suffering. So, but before I get into this sort of private, personal space of a vegan rescue home and trying to look at specific individuals, let's take one step back, and I'm going to look at India. For starter, India is relevant in the context of this conference, but also India is relevant in the context of the egg industry itself. Because currently there's this massive cultural campaign in India to promote eggs as vegetarian, right? Because lots of vegetarians don't eat eggs, so the egg sector, the egg industry wants to say, no, there's every reason to think of eggs as vegetarian. And here you can see some of these arguments there below. And they say, it's a reasonable compromise to settle for eggs because egg is vegetarian, and they say that, you know, neither is derived from flesh nor calls for slaughter, which we know is not the case. We know that dairy and the egg industry is they're both very much slaughter industries, because once the animals are spent, they of course go for slaughter. But the campaigning and the propaganda and the kind of weight that is thrown and the money that is thrown behind these campaigns are so insistent about promoting the idea of the eggs as a vegetarian food. But when you think about eggs as a vegetarian food, the key argument is it doesn't involve slaughter. They don't have to die to lay eggs, and they carry no living embryo. And you know, they can produce eggs without seeing any roosters ever, right? So these are the arguments, and we know that this is not true, but these are the arguments to promote eggs as a vegetarian food in India. It's very strong at the moment. But India also is one of the largest. It's going to become the second largest egg producer in the world in 22 this year. And if you think about it, if you think about the scale of egg production, of 114 billion. Again, these numbers don't compute. Like intellectually, we can sort of register these numbers, but our human brain is incapable of actually computing these sorts of numbers, right? We just know that they are massive, and 80% of eggs in India, of course, and really worldwide, they come from hens that are held in battery farms. And as you can see, now those are photos that I took. The ones on top are the ones that I took when I went to the Hyderabad farms with Shreya, and the ones below are from an Australian farm, but they're really, the most common breeds are the leghorns, which are the ones on top, and then the Isa Browns. So the Isa Browns and the leghorns are the most common breeds, and then we live with Isa Browns in our backyard. So it's these prolific layers. These two breeds are amongst the most prolific layers, and we come to know more about these eggs, more about these chickens when we live with them in these close quarters. And of course, but what does the industry tell you? The industry will, the advertising tagline of these industries is, oh, happy chickens lay more eggs. It's a little bit like saying happy women menstruate more, which is not, most women will tell you that is not the case at all. It's pretty just uncomfortable, to say the least, and oftentimes just chronically painful. But the industry will often say happy chickens lay more eggs, happy cows produce more milk. These things are simply not true. It's like saying happy mothers produce more milk. Well, no, happiness has nothing to do with it. Oftentimes, excessive milk production, excessive menstruation, excessive these are actually causes of female discomfort, if not actual suffering. So, but then the egg industry will often, tell us these sorts of, taglines and propaganda. So these two breeds, the leghorns up there, Isa Browns, these are of course the most common, but there's many breeds that are bred to be egg layers. These are an outcome of selective breeding, right? Now let's have a quick look at what selective breeding actually means. So selective breeding is, what does selective breeding actually involve? The selective breeding, so the original chicken, what we tend to forget about not just chickens but all farmed animals is that they're actually formerly wild species. Domestication is not their natural state of being, of course, right? So the original chicken ancestor, the wild chicken ancestor, is the red jungle fowl, mainly found in South and Southeast Asia. So India is also the native home of the red jungle fowl. They are the main ancestral species. And there's an enormous diversity of chicken species throughout South and Southeast Asia. Okay, but this massive breed of chicken diversity has really largely been reduced to four main breeds, which is, the meat chickens, the broiler chickens, chickens for eggs. These are the Isas and the game chickens, and then the game chickens often used for fighting and rooster fighting and that sort of thing, and then the bantam chickens, right? These are the four main breeds, but in particular, the egg industry has really driven the logic of it's more than even meat, but of course we know that meat is almost as culpable, but egg laying has really driven the production of a particular breed of chickens, to the extent that the red jungle fowl, the original chicken, is now borderline extinct. They're borderline, they are highly endangered, and they're at risk of extinction. So it's almost crazy to think of domesticated species like chickens, who are the most numerous farmed animal species, but fundamentally they're actually endangered, because what we see as chickens is actually ones that we have selectively bred. So what does selective breeding actually mean in the case of egg-laying chickens, right? So it takes about 24 hours. It takes about a day for a yolk to form into a fully shelled egg. Okay. Now the egg is actually, it's similar to the ova, right? So women also, we could think of women as laying eggs, like the ova is sort of, we don't call it eggs, but in fact sometimes we actually do. Now the original red jungle fowl, the wild red jungle fowl, would normally lay about 4 to 10 eggs in spring, over 4 to 10 days. So they do lay. So a one egg has always taken about 1 day to form, right? And they lay in clutches, which could be anything between 4 to 10 eggs. But again, it depends on the individual body biochemistry of each chicken. It's similar to women, like we all have different body biochemistries. So chickens also have obviously different body biochemistries. So they may lay anything between 10 to 4 to 10 eggs over a similar period, because it takes about a day to form an egg. It is this specific trait, okay, what is this trait? It is daily ovulation, but in clutches. So when they lay almost on consecutive days, they do this naturally. They do this in the wild, right? But they do it in very short and seasonal timeframes. Now, this particular trait of laying in clutches, like daily laying every day in clutches, this is the specific trait that has been amplified by the egg industry. So in effect, we now have chickens that lay more often, which is almost every day. They also lay larger eggs, okay, larger sized eggs. The egg size has increased, and they also lay heavier eggs. So which means they're pushing on. It's almost like human women have been bred to push out huge babies, like 7-kilo babies or 8 kilo. You know what I'm saying? So that's what's basically happened, is that they're bred not only to lay more often, because the original size of a chicken egg is actually not that large. So now they lay larger eggs, they lay heavier eggs. Okay, so they're almost incessantly fertile. This is a sign of fertility. They're almost incessantly fertile. So the original clutch, which was about 4 to 10 eggs a year in spring, now composes 250 to 300 eggs. So the clutch size has just massively exponentially exploded. What this actually means is that seasonal periods of infertility is actually no longer possible. Okay, now we have to understand that periods of infertility are actually a natural vital state of health for the female body. We're not, even as women, we're not constantly fertile. Like, there are periods of infertility every month. And again, it is different for women, depending on each woman's body biochemistry. But the point is that periodic infertility, seasonal infertility, however you want to think about it, is actually a natural state of health. It's a state of good health. Okay, but this natural state of infertility is no longer possible for chickens. So the modern chicken ovulates about once a day. Now compare this with a woman. They actually ovulate about once a month. All right, even though our weight, our size, everything is much heavier. So a chicken, before being sent to the slaughterhouse, ovulates about 300 times in a lifetime of 18 months, whereas human women, for example, typically ovulate 500 times from puberty to menopause. So which is over a much longer period, whereas they do this in a compressed period of 18 months. So it's an escalated state of hyperovulation, hyperfertility. And what are the consequences of this hyperfertility? Because the egg industry will say things like, oh, we will increase the size of the cages, or de-beaking. But nobody talks about the fact that at a very genomic level, right at the level of their DNA, they're compromised. The real cages are actually not even the cages that they're in. It's almost like their bodies, because their bodies are producing at a rate which is exponential. So as a rescuer, so in the early days of rescues, when we were still learning and we didn't know, and that's what I'm saying, new knowledge comes to light in the rescue context. We just thought, oh, they're out of the cage, they're out of the farm, they're giving them good food, they're fine. And we didn't realize, oh my God, but what about their genes, the genetics? The genetics are so messed up. Like we can't. How do we respond to that? The fact that they're going to lay every day, and what are the consequences of that? So this is where things begin to change, right? So once and I'm not just talking about a rescue home in general, but also specifically a vegan rescue home. Where in a vegan rescue home, the interesting thing, the immediate contrast to a farm, is that the focus is no longer the eggs. The eggs don't matter. It's the hens that matter. Whereas in a farm, it's the eggs that matter and the hens don't matter, right? So these chickens. So this is about close to a year after rescue. So they obviously have their feathers and they're in good health. But when they came, they were just scrappy, bald and feather pecked. I mean, the kind of chickens that you would have seen in farms. And you can still see that they both have experienced DVKing, one more than the other. And we would try and take them to the park, try and get there before the dogs get there, which they quite enjoyed. But what I want to also draw to light in this presentation is that don't be afraid to try and interpret animal expressions, right? And this is something which also was a knowledge. If you just thought, oh, chickens all look alike. If you look at these chickens, like the wonder in their eyes, and this is something which, because you get to see so many different types of expressions, it's actually really, when they see greenery for the first time. I mean, these are chickens who live in a cage for 18 months, in a really compressed cage, six chickens in a cage for 18 months in farms of 30,000 birds, completely abstracted, never seen a single blade of grass in their lives, and they suddenly see green. And, so I guess one of the things that I would probably, it's difficult to ever be sure about what they're thinking. It's so difficult to be very sure about what another human being is thinking, for that matter, right? Like we can never know, but don't be afraid to trust your instinct sometimes. Like I think we can give ourselves that permission. So these were two chickens who were rescued and then they were rescued from the slaughterhouse, 18 months. Again, they were literally on the brink of slaughter and they were pulled out. So these were, we call them one at the back, Lila, and then the one at the front, Ria, and all they did post-rescue. And so when the chicken rescue, when the undercover activists went, grabbed what chickens they could, because we were very early inexperienced rescues at that time, they gave us what they thought were relatively healthier hens, right? So they were not as badly feather pecked, etc. What we didn't know that these girls were seriously sick. In fact, all of these chickens are seriously sick. We didn't know that. So when they came for about close to a week, all they did was sleep, because after that intensive tension of being in a farm and being in this constant state of being caged with three, don't have the space to spread your wings, nothing. They were exhausted. And you can actually, even again very afraid to read expressions, you can actually, I think, the one that Lila, whose face is visible, I think it's easy to see the exhaustion, the tiredness, and then all they did was just sleep. And it was actually in contrast to some of our other rescue chickens who they were just doing their thing, and we could just see that they were just so tired. They were just so tired. The one in front, Ria, she actually died very quickly, about 12 days after rescue. We actually we couldn't read the signs of chicken sickness, and that's another whole presentation. It's actually, they start showing signs of it, but but they also are very good at hiding illness. Okay, because they're prey animals, they are very good at hiding it as well. So you got to, that does insider knowledge of how you interpret their sickness. We didn't know, we couldn't read the signs, and she died about 12 days into her rescue. But they're also, it's this whole process of discovery that they discover new things, and you can see that they turn out to be quite scrappy. Some of them turn out, and the first time that she actually got to lay in a straw box, and so there was all this sort of excitement of just discovering new things. But Lila, we thought she was doing well. Like she was the one that survived. After the exhaustion, you can actually see her face looks a little bit better. We thought she was doing okay. We didn't know how severely sick she was, how brutally sick she was. Now, the interesting thing about Lila was that she was about 18 months. 18 months is when they sent them to the slaughterhouse. We didn't know. And she never laid, right? She hardly laid. Some of the other rescue hens would lay, but Lila never laid. And we thought, we just assumed that, that they stopped laying, and that's why the farm sends them to the slaughterhouse. That's why they stop, when they stop laying. And I used to actually joke about it. I thought, oh, she's got menopause, menopause, she's got menopause. What we didn't know that these chickens are actually bred to never lay, never stop laying. So when one of these breeds of hens is not laying, it actually means there is a massive problem brewing, which is why also these farms send them to the slaughterhouse, because at 18 months the problems start to brew, right? So we didn't know that she was getting quite sick. And again, this was when I was away. My husband sent me the photo on the left. And you can actually see she's hunched. She's, both of these hens, by the way, they're all the same size. But she's, again, as I was saying, don't be afraid to read expressions. As compared to the hen on the right, who's looking quite bright and confident, she was looking really hunched. She was looking really, I think so I texted my husband back saying she looks like she's in pain. And he was like, oh, no, she's fine. Because, a lot of they do tend to hide their illnesses, so they actually run around as well, so it can be quite confusing. But as I was saying, don't be afraid to read expressions. They can be sick, and as it turned out, a week later when we did go to the vet, we found out how sick she was. And this is the different chicken, but you can see he's with the vet, and again you can look at her face as well, her facial expression. She's not happy. You can tell she's sick and she's not happy either. So she was unwell. So about a week later, and it turned out to be possibly a week too late, she stopped she withdrew from food. She was not eating anymore. She was just drinking huge amounts. She was, they opened their mouth and start gasping. All of these signs we learned are a sign of immense pain, okay? And it is not unique to this one chicken. These are the kind of suffering that all of these, it's prolific, it's prevalent in the egg industry, this the kind of female suffering that goes on. And we took this chicken to the vet, and he felt her, he palpated her abdomen, and he felt her, and he found fluid, right? Like he palpated fluid. They also did an X-ray and ultrasound. I mean, and by the way, avian veterinary services, they were non-existent even 5-6 years ago. So the vets never have any training in dealing with birds, and they have started to learn through our chickens who come. So in the early days, they would make a lot of mistakes as well because they never get trained. No vet gets trained. Chickens are seen as so irrelevant to the egg industry, right? So for care in terms of welfare. So the vets never get training. Even if they wanted, they never get training. So now, because vegan chicken rescues are picking up, and people bringing them to the vet, and they finally start learning a few things. So he palpated it, but of course this was a fairly experienced vet. He palpated it, and he said she's full of eggs. And I was like, what? How is she full of eggs? What are you talking about? Because she never laid. How can she be full of eggs? What we discovered, and this is true again, this is one of the most prevalent forms of suffering for female chickens who are in the egg industry, is that because they lay every day, their reproductive systems, their ovaries and their oviduct, they actually break down. They actually, they fundamentally break down. And as a result of which, they're not strong enough to push the egg out. They begin to lay internally. It's actually crazy to think that so Lila, we thought she was not laying. She actually was laying. She was laying inside herself. She was laying in her body cavity, right? So the vet said, this is my course of treatment. I'll do a surgery and I'm going to pull out all the eggs, the eggs that are inside her. And then he said, and this is what the interesting thing is, he said, I'm going to put her on a contraception. Okay, which is, we all know that we neuter cats and dogs, but the whole idea of neutering a chicken, he said, I'm going to put her on a contraception, which is like an implant, right? As you know, women have many choices of contraception. So the chickens have so one of the choices is an implant. You can actually just implant in a chip under your arm, the skin on your arm or whatever. And he said, I'll just insert a chip under her. They do it on the breast or the back of the chicken. And he said, that's what I'm going to do. It so happened that she was so sick that she 10 minutes into her surgery, she died. But these were the eggs that he pulled out of her. Okay, close to a kilogram of eggs, close to a kilogram. And that's why she was, she wasn't a great eater, which is actually unusual. And so it's because there was no room enough to eat. And she was laying every single day. She used to go into her egg box and lay, and we thought, she was just used to it. We how humans make up stories. She's probably just used to laying from the egg farm, which is why she's going into her egg box. No, she was going into egg box because she was laying, except it wasn't external, it was internal. And this is so common. So much later during the course of my work, I actually went to a hatchery in Calcutta. It was a government hatchery, and I was telling the vet about this. And he goes, yeah, this is a common problem, which is why we send them to the slaughterhouse. There's a really good reason why they send them to the slaughterhouse at about 12 to 18 months of age, because that's when the reproductive systems break down. And these girls begin to lay internally, right? Who knows about this? It's really rare. It's only because the egg sector, by the way, does know about this. They never publicize it because because they don't want more advocacy. You can only advocate for what you know, right? So this is when you don't know this, and which is why when you care for them outside of a farming context, new knowledge comes to light. So this was the amount of eggs that, rescuers as well as vets, they call them cooked eggs because they almost look like they're boiled eggs. But this was close to a year's worth of eggs that she had laid inside herself, right? And of course, she didn't survive her surgery. It's actually really interesting, right? And I'm going to read this quote, which is on the left. It says, in large populations of animals, including humans, it is now normal to have some die from causes. We all die of causes that are not related to disease. You often say you die of natural causes, okay? In chickens, the natural cause is actually directly related to making an egg. Because think about this, fertility, that is laying, or in the case of women menstruating, that is not a disease. That's normal. That's a normal state of health. That's fine, right? But it is when the trait has been amplified through selective breeding to lay exponentially, to lay every day, to lay so prolifically, to be hyperfertile, then it actually becomes fertility in and of itself is a normal condition for most female bodies, not a problem. But when you make a being hyperfertile, then it becomes a life-threatening condition, right? So, over the course of these years, because we have been looking after chickens now for 7 years, they have ovarian cancers now, which are previously only known to humans. Like only humans actually get ovarian cancers, but now chickens get them. Cloacal prolapse. Cloaca is basically from where they poop, they lay eggs all through. It's like you could think of it as a vagina or pelvis, but then because they're pushing out an egg every day, it basically prolapses out. It comes out, which is obviously extremely painful. Internal laying, which is also called eggoperitonitis. That's what I'm focusing on in this presentation. Dystocia is another common. Dystocia is basically the inability to push an egg out. Okay, so basically they become egg bound. They can't push the egg out, right? And this is again super common. So as the birds begin to get a little bit older, and by the way, we're still really young at 12 months, 18 months. The reproductive systems get so weak, and they just can't push the eggs out, or they can't. In the case of mammals like cows or buffaloes, they can't push the fetus out, right? So dystocia is one of the highest causes of farmed maternal mortality, no matter what the species, just the incapacity to either push a fetus out or to push an egg out, right? Then they have misshapen eggs. Now, misshapen eggs are basically a sign of calcium deficiency. Like humans, of course, think of eggshells as garbage because, people use the eggs and then they throw the eggshells out. But where does the eggshell come from, right? That's calcium. And when they're producing eggs at such a high rate, it actually comes from their bones. It comes from their very bones. And in addition to this, there's also, the mental stress of daily laying, because we all know that the whole, menstruating, fertility, it's hormone driven. It's not necessarily an easy experience. And when chickens are hyperovulating, it's almost underestimated the kind of emotional and mental stress that this kind of hormonal change can involve. And the other thing is metabolic hunger, which is hunger which almost is not possible to address. Okay, so if you talk to any woman who's breastfeeding, for example, she'll tell you that, oh my God, she's hungry all the time, because breastfeeding is energy intensive. You burn a lot of calories when you're breastfeeding, when you're lactating. Okay, and that is the same for cows or buffaloes or any other farmed animal, and milk, dairy animal. But egg laying as well involves burning a lot of calories, which means that they are constantly hungry, right? Because they're burning so many calories, and many other issues. But of course, I'm focusing mainly on the internal laying in this case. So what happened then? What was the solution? Like, as carers, what do you do? And then the vet suggested something which was crazy. He suggested a contraception for an egg chicken. Now you can see these are again another Isa Brown, again from an egg farm, one of the commonest breeds, and they're basically injecting a contraceptive implant under her skin, right? And what this means is that once they put the implant in, they stop laying. And again, this depends on the individual body biochemistry of each chicken. They may stop laying for 4 months, 7 months, 12 months. Again, for a woman, it works differently. When you have a contraceptive implant, it works. It may last for 3 years in a woman, 5 years in a woman. It depends on our individual body biochemistry. Same thing for a chicken. It could last for 7, 8 months, whatever. And once it wears off, then you go back to the vet and get another one, right? So so what this basically means is that these chickens, and this is really quite radical, they only lay between these implants. So they only lay between 4 to 10 eggs a year, which is exactly how the ancestral species, the red jungle fowl, the original species, used to lay. Okay, so for a species that is that domesticated, that has been so intensively hyperbred that this chicken is actually not even a normal chicken, because no wild animal produces this hyper fertile. Okay, so to restore, so this is really a human creation. Chickens like these are actually human creation. So for them to experience a form of ovulation which is going back to the jungle fowl is actually quite a radical thing. So I guess one of the things I want to close with is what is really the political value of this contraception? What does it actually mean to have contraception for obviously it benefits those specific individuals because they're not laying every day, they're not experiencing the suffering. So of course these 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 chickens who get implanted, obviously they benefit, right? But what is the larger political purpose? What does it actually mean for an animal welfare movement? What does it mean for an animal advocacy movement to, what does the implantation of a few chickens like the ones who are incredibly fortunate to have that sort of an option, what does it mean for chickens like these? Now this is again from a photo that I took from the farm that I went to with Shreya. On the left hand side the chicken's dead, and the other side the chicken's lame. But the guy, the one who was owning the egg farm, he said, I can still get 3, 4 chickens out of this lame chicken. He 3, 4 eggs out of he was still waiting for those 3, 4 eggs, right? And you can see the carton of eggs on the side. What does a contraception mean for these sorts of chickens? Okay, what does it mean? Now, infertility in any patriarchal society, and it's a global patriarchy. Infertility has always carried stigma for females. Okay, so if a woman is female and she's infertile or cannot have children or whatever, we all know about the stigma that's associated with infertility. The stigma of infertility for chickens is that they get sent to the slaughterhouse, right? The stigma has really, really enormous consequences. So fertility and reproduction, these are core to the ways in which farm female species, and also women, they are valued by the patriarchy. We are only valuable if you're just fertile, pregnant, in the home or in the farm, right? That's how females are generally valued. So what does an infertile chicken mean feminists have always been interested in contraception. Contraception gives women reproductive choice for a whole range of reasons. They've always advocated for contraception, reproductive control, that it's always the females that must have reproductive control over the body, whether it's in the case of abortion, whether it's in the case of when to get pregnant, whether it's in the case of any reproductive choice. The control must purely be with that individual woman. It cannot be an institutional. It cannot be a one-size-fits-all solution. Reproductive choice. But what does it mean? What does it mean for the chickens? How can we think about these things for chickens? Because what does reproductive control even mean for a species that has been hyperbred at the level of the genes? Like they never had a choice in their breeding. And now they don't actually really have a choice in the contraception either. So if I take them to the vet to get a contraception, they don't have a choice in that either. Like it benefits them, but they don't have a choice. So what is the purpose of a contraception like Super Lauren is the contraception? It doesn't merely transform a fertile body into a sterile body, which is what contraception does, right? It takes a fertile body, a fertile female body, or a male body for that matter, and turns it into a sterile one. And in the case of chickens, it actually can save their lives. So yes, it does that physiologically, but politically, what does it do? And I think that the main, and these are again 2 of our chickens in our backyard. I think the main thing that the value of this contraception is it perhaps helps us understand more clearly the structures of the egg industry that is predicated, that relies upon female fertility. Okay, so it really helps us understand in some ways. It gives us an insight into the whole idea of an infertile hen. When the hen has been bred to be so hyperfertile, and the only useful hen, the only legitimate hen is a fertile hen. So the whole idea of an infertile hen, it helps us to sort of give us an insight, I think, into the idea of an infertile hen, normalize the idea of an infertile hen, because hens are actually like any other birds, they are actually infertile for most of the year. They're only really fertile in spring. So, infertility is actually natural for them for most of the year. But feminists have always been very, very, they have really emphasized, capitalism. And by capitalism, I mean this sort of mass production, this massive production that exploits nature. We all know about the use of rivers and the use of land and the use of animals, of course, for profit generation, and human bodies as well. Like the use of poor people or the use of racialized people, like minorities or whatever it is. Violence per se is inherent to capitalism, like all forms of capitalism, because it is only focused on production, not what production actually involves. That doesn't matter. As long as production happens, the process is irrelevant. So violence, feminists have always argued, is obviously inherent to capitalism, but they have argued for special attention to patriarchal capitalism, which basically means how are female bodies used and exploited in order to make profit, right? And this is in the case of humans, but of course it extends to the case of, patriarchal capitalism really, really matters in the case of farmed animals, because animal farming wouldn't work if females were not reproductive and fertile, right? So patriarchal capitalism is probably epitomized in the case of farmed animals. So capitalism basically values production as the only value, the only absolute value, the only, there is no other regard for anything except production. Production is the only absolute value. And I think it is exemplified in a capitalism, particularly where a chicken, her only absolute value is in the egg, nothing else, right? So, as I said earlier, the whole notion of reproductive choice is obviously, it's a moot one for chickens because they've never had a choice, so they don't, you can't think of reproductive choice in the same way as you can think about for women. But contraception probably allows us an insight into their older ovulation patterns, right? Where they lay 4 eggs a year or 10 eggs a year, depending on their body biochemistry, but they definitely don't lay 250 to 300 eggs a year, right? So it kind of shows us, it's not a question of, so reproductive choice is a particular political term which is applied to humans. But in some ways, it allows us to sort of at least sort of think about a more natural ovulation pattern rather than what they commonly experience. So I guess in closing, I just want to sort of, take you through some of these chickens are no longer alive, some of them are, but they have kind of been living with us for a while. And I guess it's just the wonder. It's just, these chickens genuinely came to us featherless, scrappy, bloodied, and I guess it also sort of is for us, the point that I would like to make is also, I guess, for animal advocacy to promote the idea of microsanctuaries. Like, it doesn't always have to be the big sanctuaries that do all the work, because they do, of course, do valuable work. But can we also promote the idea of microsanctuaries where individuals might take the responsibility for two animals, 2 chickens, 3 chickens, what's possible. And what this also does is normalize rescue, liberation, thinking about animals differently through society, right? Because if my neighbor has a rescued goat in her backyard, it's a rescued goat, and there's new things, it's not for exploitation. It makes us think about makes us think about these animals in a different light. So, you know, and again, for me, it was always the wonder. Like they see greenery. It's a wonder experience. And again, if you look at their expressions, look at, you know, this is not still in the early months of rescue. You can look at the surprise and you can look at the wonder. You know, because I've also seen pain faces in chickens, right? And I showed you some of the photos of the pain faces, but just the wonder. Just this, you know, and of course these chickens were fortunate. These were all on contraception, so they actually managed to not experience the sort of suffering that daily egg laying involves. I don't know what they're doing here. I think they might be shopping on eBay on my phone. Not sure. And you know, so this is one of our chickens being taken to the vet. And just like a dog loves looking out of the window, right? So it's just normalizing and trying to see a different sort of way of looking at these hens. And this chicken we lost a few months ago. She was the queen of the flock. She ran a really tight ship for six months. So just wanted to end on this note, basically to say that caring for a farmed animal outside of a farming space is probably really important for us to sort of understand different sorts of, give us an insight into different forms of suffering. And while this might not be possible necessarily in a large sanctuary which deals with lots of animals, this might actually be, in fact, more possible in a micro sanctuary where, you know, as I said, one human rescue and one rescued animal are a micro sanctuary. So I think there's also an argument for encouraging micro sanctuaries, for people to sort of, you know, encouraging the idea of a micro sanctuary movement, and what we can learn from each other when, you know, your experience of rescuing a chicken, or your experience of trying to treat a particular illness. But what this also forces, what the other thing that this forces is that forces veterinarians to become more educated as well. Which I think is really important ultimately for a full animal justice movement, is for veterinarians to also change their minds, right? And as I said, 6-7 years ago, no veterinarian knew anything about chickens, and now they have a little bit of a better idea. So it forces more knowledge, more insight, and new ways of thinking for basically everyone who's concerned with care, whether rescuers or whether it's veterinarians. So on that note, I would like to end, and I'm very happy to answer any questions that might be there, and of course also feel free to email me anytime. It's you know, you can just Google me and you'll be able to find my institutional email, and if it's helpful, I'm happy to answer any questions. Thank you so much again.
Thank you, Dr. Yamini, so much for this insightful session. I'm sure we have a lot to take away from this session, and we'll surely I will be for sure sitting back and would really want to consider a small sanctuary, and I've always been wanting to, but I think this is the time. You know, you really gave me an inspiration. I think it's something that I can really do. So yes, thank you so much for that.
Not at all. Thank you so much.
A little short on time, so but sorry, I have some couple of questions. No worries. I think it was I wouldn't have interrupted at all. Please. So there's one question that we have here from a participant. Sorry, yeah. So one of the participants is asking, many people feed their dogs, or many NGO feed their dogs that include chicken in their meal. How do we avoid that, and what to suggest them instead?
That's a really, really good question. Thank you for asking that question. You know, and it's really tough. It's excruciating, actually. This question is excruciating because we have rescued cats in our home as well, right? The reason why we have rescued cats is because there's an actual war against cats in a country like Australia. They hate, you know, many people hate cats, and any rescued cats, and of course they are not vegan. They have, you know, chicken, and they do get to, and it's really excruciating on the one hand caring for chickens, on the other hand having rescued cats. Now, from what I understand, it actually, and I've heard this from a number of rescuers, it actually is possible. You know, that there is a specific difference between cats and dogs, and there's a different politics associated with cats and dogs. When it comes to dogs, it actually is perhaps really possible for them to thrive, not just survive, but thrive on a vegan diet. It has to be a thoughtful vegan diet, but they actually genuinely can. And you know, this sort of valuation of dogs or cats over chickens is actually really interesting, because if you genuinely ask me, I don't see a difference in intelligence between a chicken and a cat or a chicken and a dog because they are so bright. They really are. They're very engaged. They're bright. In our homes, the chickens are, and I think this is a natural state of affairs. The chickens are higher in hierarchy. The cats are below. You know, so the cats are actually below in this multi-species hierarchy. The cats are below, chickens are above. So I think in the case of dogs, this is really important. I think a well-researched scientific diet, which is a good vegan diet for dogs, is actually possible. Now it becomes much more difficult in the case of cats who are apparently more obligate carnivores. I have heard a few vegan rescuers say that the cats thrive on a vegan diet, and one of the major have come up is that if you look at if you go to a dog food store or a cat food store, for example, you will find lots of options for dogs with digestive issues and dogs for sensitive stomachs, etc. And then if there is a vegan option, there'll be just the one vegan option. Now, this is partly also there's nothing innocent about all of this. Like, there's so little research done into vegan dog food and vegan cat food. Like, we can have a wide variety of sensitive stomach vegan food, sensitive digestive issues vegan food, protein-rich vegan food, vegan food for lactating mothers. We can actually have. It's not beyond us. It's not beyond us. But there needs to be a lot of advocacy, and there needs to be a lot of research that is diverted into it. And I think overall, there is an awareness, and hopefully this will mobilize forward. But this is where I really love the sort of interaction between activists and academics, because researchers need to do more. Because when it comes to non-vegan cat and food options, there's any number of them. And we haven't actually got a really good awareness of what possibilities are available through vegan food, because virtually no research has been undertaken. So I think this also points to the fact that there is just research funding, and we need to push for more of that.
Thank you so much for that insight. It surely is tricky here, especially in India. But even I do know personally there are some activists, the vegan activists, who have rescued dogs and cats, and they are thriving on a vegan diet, in fact. So
awesome.
I
that's
really
excellent.
I really hope there's more concrete research that goes on, and so that more people are comfortable in trying it out. Yes, your point makes complete sense. I'll move on to one more question.
Sure.
Okay. In a country like India, where it's still a huge challenge to establish among society the sentient identity of farmed animals, how do you suggest we should talk about the role of patriarchy and female sexual politics that leads to the exploitation of farmed animals?
Wow, that's an amazing question. That's a great question. And look, patriarchy is not unique to India. Patriarchy is everywhere, okay? Patriarchy is everywhere. It's a question of degrees. It's a question of how well it's almost like sometimes we think of it as, patriarchy, by the way, is absolutely everywhere. And it's a question of degrees, yes. Now, in my work, and a lot of my work has actually been on cows and cow politics, and I have a book coming out later this year. In my work, I have conceptualized of this word called anthropatriarchy, which is not, patriarchy, of course, is how men regard women. That's a very simplistic form. Anthropatriarchy is how humans regard animals. Like, Carol Adams, I think many of you would be familiar with the work of Carol Adams. Carol Adams says, patriarchy doesn't just manifest in male-female inequality. And I'm putting this in a very simplistic form because, of course, we have an extraordinary gender diversity that we need to celebrate. So this is very simplistic, but patriarchy is not just in gender inequality. She says patriarchy is also in species inequality, right? The inequality between humans and other species. So patriarchy, on the one hand, is not unique to India by any stretch of imagination. And the global challenge of how can we sort of start talking to, how can we start addressing this? I really think we need to start talking to feminists, like human feminists, because feminists themselves are not, as long as feminists themselves continue to see animal binary, I think we are really stuck, right? Feminists are very good at breaking down binaries, by the way. They are very good at breaking down male-female binaries because, feminism has done a lot of work in the whole arena of gender and sexuality studies. They're very good at breaking down nature-culture binaries. They're very good at breaking down a number of binaries, but feminists have yet to come to terms, or not all, but in the main, they've yet to come to terms with the with the animal human binary, right? So I think it's really important for us to sort of really start forming strategic alliances with the feminist movement. So without talking to the feminist movement, I think addressing patriarchy is going to be hard, because we actually have a common cause here. When it comes to fertility, when it comes to contraception, when it comes to reproductive choice, we have common causes. We actually really do. But that conversation is really important to start. And I think this is where it needs to start, is in animal advocacy, taking on almost an educational role in some ways for the feminist movement. And it's a large task.
Yes, indeed it is. But I'm sure with support of people like you and many present here, I believe we will reach there for it.
Yes, you guys at FIAPO and elsewhere, absolutely.
Totally. Yes. Thank you so much for this session. I'm really, really grateful for you being here. And I realize that it's pretty late there. And
no, it's been a pleasure. It's been a pleasure. Thank you so much. It's been a great pleasure, great honor. And I really mean it. Thank you so much to both Sneha and Sanjana. You guys have been amazing, because, I was so all over the place. But you guys have been so patient, so gracious. And I think people like you are instrumental to running such a successful conference online and so smoothly. So thank you.
Thank you so much. Have a good night. Thank you.
You too. And I'll see you in other sessions. I'll see you all in other sessions.
Yes.
Bye.